Hey, good morning from Los Angeles. I'm Benjamin from Samy's Camera, and today is a really big day for Canon. We have a host of new products being released all at once this morning, and I'm video chatting with the Canon team all over the United States. So, namely, the first things we want to talk about are the R5 and R6 camera releases. I can't think of any other camera in recent time that's been this anticipated and this hyped as far as the possible specs. So today we're going to talk to Rudy at Canon about what's going on with that camera.
I got to tell you, with the comment you just made, you're reading my mind. I've
Yep.
been at Canon for 23 years, and in all the time I've been at Canon, I cannot recall a new product announcement that has had this much excitement and anticipation. We had the privilege of Canon doing 3 development announcements about the EOS R5 starting late in the winter and moving into the spring, where they released selected bits of information. And certainly even just the limited amount that they pre-released, really struck a chord in the industry. And we've seen tons of rumors and all that kind of stuff to try to fill in the blanks, but we're excited to have this opportunity with Samys to officially roll out the cameras.
Yep. Well, as you mentioned, the rumors have been pretty hot, and it's great to bring this out right now and tell people what's actually coming out in the feature set on the new equipment. So I know that there's a lot of kind of handshaking of technology on the R5 and the R6. So Rudy, if you want to kind of take us down the line as far as the key features that they're shared, and then maybe we could kind of jump off into one and then the other. Let's talk about these things.
Absolutely. What's really exciting to me about these 2 cameras is the fusion of design, handling, and performance. And underlying all of that is, on both cameras, is a tremendous new power from the speed of the hardware in the camera, the imaging sensor in particular. Both cameras have brand new imaging sensors. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the processing in the camera with the Digic X processor, same processor that's in the EOS 1DX Mark III, which we launched earlier this year. That combination of hardware speed and processing has given both of these cameras power and responsiveness and features that we simply haven't had in a mirrorless camera up to this point. These cameras have leapfrogged, figuratively speaking, a couple of generations compared to where we have been in full frame mirrorless.
Yep. So one thing that jumped out to me when I was sort of briefed on the spec list for the cameras is the incredible speed that you've accomplished on these with the mechanical shutter and then the electronic shutter rate. Can you speak to that for us?
Absolutely. Both of these cameras, and there's a lot of shared elements in these cameras, although of course there are some areas where they're going to go their distinct ways. But one of the shared elements is that still imaging performance. 12 frames a second with the mechanical or electronic first curtain shutter, and up to 20 frames a second if you go to the silent electronic shutter. And I hasten to interject, in all cases, that is with servo autofocus and an extremely powerful form of continuous servo autofocus.
Mm-hmm. When we're shooting like that, I know other mirrorless cameras, the EVF, we get different blackout periods, things like that. How are these cameras performing at that high frame rate?
If I say that there's absolutely no blackout, that's not going to be correct, but it is so minimal now, once again, in part because of that system speed built into the camera, that they can refresh the viewfinder even during 20 frame a second shooting. So it's far less of an issue than it was on, for instance, our first generation full frame mirrorless cameras.
Great. Well, it seems like this new Digic processor is a powerhouse, especially when we get to some of the specs related to the more data-hungry functions of the camera. You guys are going to see just how powerful this new processor is. Can you talk to us about the imaging sensors themselves on the R5 and the R6?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the R6, actually, because the R6 has been the subject of many rumors over the past couple of months, even though we did not say a word about it in any of our development announcements. The rumor industry certainly was going full tilt there. And there was a lot of speculation that the 20 million pixel sensor in the R6 may well be a recycled version of an older sensor from a previous 1DX or some other camera in the line. I can assure you that's not the case. This is based on the sensor in the 1DX Mark III. Again, the camera we just launched earlier this year, the same 20 million pixel resolution. And obviously they did some changing of certain elements to make it suitable for a mirrorless form factor. But other than that, you're talking a sensor that basically brings the same elements to the table that we introduced in the 1DX Mark III. In the case of the R5 camera, now we have a totally new 45 million pixel Cmos sensor. Now, both of these sensors, of course, full frame, give you dual pixel Cmos autofocus for stills and for video. So both of them are dual pixel Cmos ready. And both of them offer just incredible system speed in being able to scan line by line or group of lines by group of lines and record and flush the sensor and be ready for the next picture. I can't say it enough how important an aspect that is to this camera's performance, whether you're shooting continuously or even if you're just taking a single picture at a time, how responsive the whole system in these cameras are.
Great. Well, we sure can't wait to show these cameras to our customers in our showrooms at Samy's. Just kind of want to interject this as a point too, with everything that's going on. I do want to let the viewers know that as of today, our showrooms are open for walk-in business.
Oh, that's terrific.
We're taking some additional precautions to make sure that you, our valued clients, and our staff are well protected with what's going on. But we will invite you to come in once we get these products in the store so that we can do one-on-one demonstrations with our customers. And at Samy's, we're also happy to do this sort of thing. We're able to do this type of video conferencing with our customers. So if that suits you better in your shopping, we can make it happen. Just pick up the phone, call Samy's, talk to a sales agent, and we'll line that up for you. Well, I want to ask you about just the build quality on the cameras, R5, R6. Can you talk about weather sealing, construction materials?
Sure. Now, this is an area where they're similar, but yet a little bit different. The R6 has extensive weather sealing, and it's a pretty durable camera with a nice solid feel to it. The exterior of the camera is polycarbonate. So figuratively speaking, you can think of this camera as being kind of from the same bolt of cloth in that regard as an EOS R or an EOS 6D Mark II digital SLR camera, which is to say pretty solid, but we're not talking a 1DX, we know that. Now, one area where the engineers really went all out is in shutter durability. On the R6, they're claiming that they have durability tested the shutter mechanism in that camera to 300,000 exposures. That is twice the level of exposure testing that our engineers gave to the 5D Mark IV when that was introduced 4 years ago. And of course, that camera's got a good track record over those 4 years. So durability-wise, weather resistance-wise, the R6 is built to quite a strong standard. We think it's going to satisfy the vast majority of Samy's customers. The R5, the 45 million pixel version, is even stronger. Here, the exterior of the camera is all magnesium alloy. The camera weighs a couple of ounces more than the R6 camera does. And in terms of weather sealing and shutter durability, it exceeds the R6 as well. There is more extensive gasketing and sealing against moisture and dust and so on. And the shutter durability is up to 500,000 exposures on that camera, according to tests by Canon engineers. The only other camera that Canon has ever made with a 500,000 shutter durability count is the 1DX Mark III, which once again, we just launched earlier this year.
Incredible specs. I mean, 500,000 images is a crazy number. Well, right. And I mean, I'm personally only aware of industrial shutters for aerial photography, where you're flying a jet over something for a geological survey, the plane is vibrating, where they need to design shutters that have that type of cycle count and that robust of a build. And Canon is bringing that technology all the way down into a camera you can purchase and take out and abuse, and it's going to keep working. It sounds like this R5 is really the camera tailored for the hardcore pro that's going to be out in the field shooting the camera heavily. Does that seem right?
I think you're right. And on top of that, I ask your customers to think about this. Yeah. We at Canon have never had a combination of this level of image quality, detail, and resolution with this level of performance in one camera. where we could shoot up to 20 frames a second, raw, full res images with autofocus, and have 45 million pixels on every shot.
Can you speak to me about the autofocus systems on the two cameras, especially for still photography, how we're navigating that, points and things?
This is another area where the power of these cameras' performance is just otherworldly compared to where we've been with full frame mirrorless up to this point. And I'm not knocking the EOS R and the RP cameras. They are going to remain solid elements in our system moving forward for their value and so on. But in terms of performance, both of these cameras, the R6 and the R5, are really in another league. First off, I want to make it clear, in virtually every way you can think of, the autofocusing systems on the R5 and the R6 are identical. It's not like one performs better and faster or whatever. The features, the customization, and so on is identical between the two. The power of these cameras, in particular, their subject recognition and tracking capabilities, goes just way beyond anything we've had before. We have powerful face detection, eye detection, and the head detection technology that we first launched in the 1DX Mark III earlier in 2020, which is brilliant when you're on a subject and if the camera loses the face for whatever reason, if a person's wearing a large brimmed hat and suddenly the eyes get blocked, if a person turns their head, if they're simply wearing headgear like a football player, a hockey player, whatever the case may be, and the system can't identify a face, it can still put focus on the head and not look for other sharp elements, like maybe a vehicle that the person is in, a background element or something like that. Now, on top of that, we have terrific, and we really think the wildlife people are going to love this for video and for stills. We have terrific animal detection autofocus as well, where we can identify eyes, faces of animals, and bodies of animals. And we're talking cats, dogs, and birds. We're not saying it'll identify every single type of animal, on the earth, but it is tuned to be able to recognize and latch on eyes, faces, and bodies of those type of animals. That's a trifecta: eyes, faces, bodies for animal detection that right now none of our competitors in full frame mirrorless can offer. So we've jumped from not having any form of reliable animal detection to perhaps the most extensive one in the industry as of mid-2020.
Well, that's incredible, especially the autofocus control for our furry friends. I know almost all photographers, no matter how professional you are, if you have pets, you love them and you love photographing them. So wildlife photographers and those of us that love their pets are going to take advantage of that feature. Rudy, that's an incredible autofocus system on both of those cameras. We're looking forward to it.
It's tremendous, and I think the customers are going to love it when they see the power of that system in their hands. It's unprecedented in the Canon EOS history.
Well, you're moving a lot of data very quickly. Can you talk about the media that's writing these images? Is there a difference between the two cameras?
Yes, there is. Both cameras, of course, are going with dual memory cards so that you have the opportunity for backup and so on. In the case of the R5, because of the size of the files and the potential size of video files, which we can get into in a few moments, we have a CF Express card slot and an SD card slot, which is UHS-2 compliant. With the smaller files on the R6 camera, we also have two card slots. They're both SD UHS-2 compliant. So we're confident that with that CF Express card slot in the R5 camera, that still photographers who are really putting pedal to the metal in terms of continuous shooting of raw images, and for our video customers, that they're going to find what they need in terms of card performance to back up the performance that the camera itself offers.
Great. Well, Rudy, I think it's time to switch gears on these cameras because all of those specs are incredible. But what really gripped me, because I work at our CinemaWorks, our high-end filmmaking division at Samy's Camera, it's a fourth floor of our Hollywood location, are the video specs on these cameras. They really went above and beyond at Canon to make these serious filmmaking tools in addition to incredible still image cameras. Rudy, let's talk about video resolutions on the R5 and R6.
Absolutely. You know, we'll start with the R5 because, I mean, that's where all the action has been since we made those development announcements starting late in the winter. This camera indeed does have 8K recording capability. It's the first interchangeable lens camera in a still camera form factor that's going to have built-in 8K recording capability. And it'll do that in 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second. That's from the full width of the imaging sensor, and that's with autofocus throughout, including movie,
Wow.
servo, AF. We're talking dual pixel CMOS autofocus everywhere. The 4K capabilities are very robust. In 4K, you've got the choice of recording at 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, or 60 frames a second. And then you have a high frame rate recording in 4K of 120 frames a second, which is a separate item on the menu. So the 4K capabilities with all eye recording or IPB compression recording are pretty extensive as well. Now, let me revert back to the 8K because in 8K, again, you have all eye or IPB recording and raw recording capability in 8K, which I know is going to grab the attention of many in the Hollywood cinema community. These cameras really open up some exciting possibilities. And for what it's worth, it does have full HD recording capabilities up to 60p, down from 24p up to 60p. So we haven't left that out of the equation either, knowing that there's still a fair amount of actual content that originates in full HD. So this camera is ready for that. I hasten to add again that you have the dual pixel CMOS autofocus everywhere. And the full HD and the 4K capabilities I talked about, you're getting it from the full width of the imaging sensor. So while there is a cropped 4K option in the menu, that's an option. You do not have to go into the central portion of the sensor to get 4K.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you speak to the color resolution at those different modes as far as subsampling at 8K and 4K?
Oh, this is another thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. Both of these cameras, the R6 and the R5, they are the first cameras, interchangeable lens, mirrorless, full frame cameras, that in the camera give you the ability to record 10-bit 422 internally onto the memory card in the camera. You do not need to use an external recorder to get 10-bit 422. Obviously, you can with full HD and 4K if you choose to, but you are not obligated to. Even the 8K RAW, which is 12-bit recording, can be recorded to that CF Express card in the camera.
Yeah. Well, we can't wait to bring in our filmmakers and show them what these cameras can do. 8K video is something that we've been working with at Samy Cinema Works for a long time, and it's great to see Canon, a brand that we know and love, kind of bring out the ranks of that resolution in this price point. What's the retail price on the R5?
The body alone on the R5 is going to be $38.99 at the time of its introduction. We are told that it'll be in dealers late in July, starting late in July, which is great. And then the R6 with 20 million pixels, that is going to be $24.99, and we're told that'll be in dealers maybe a month later, mid to late August of 2020 is the target as it sits right now on the R6 camera.
Great. So these things are on their way. So certainly you want to pick up the phone, talk to your sales agent at your Sammy store, get your pre-order in today, or go to samys.com and take care of your pre-order there. There's a host of other products coming out today. Before we pivot to the other exciting products we're releasing today, we went over the R5 video specs pretty deeply. How do we differ on the R6, Rudy?
I'm glad you asked that question because there's a risk with all the excitement about the R5 that a lot of people will sort of kind of lose track of the R6. And the R6 fits so impressively to so many different types of photographers. My colleague Eric has heard me say that I think for a large portion of working wedding photographers, the R6 is almost a perfect wedding camera. But that said, in terms of the video specs, The R6 is going to give you very strong 4K video performance, again, using the full width of the imaging sensor. And that's going to be oversampled 4K from a 5.1K original down to 4K at any of the settings from 24 frames a second to 60 frames a second internal recording. That can be 8-bit or it can be 10-bit 422. Now, a couple things. Obviously, it doesn't have the 8K. It does not have raw recording capability. And its video is going to be using the IPB more compressed file type rather than the option of all I or IPB, which you have in the R5 camera. So there's no question that the R5 sits higher on the totem pole in terms of, you know, total video features and capabilities. And no doubt it's going to be the first camera that the cinema folks are going to want to take a look at. But for folks who aren't in that high-end Hollywood realm, the R6's video actually brings very, very real-life, strong video performance into their worldview. And I hasten to add that once again, you've got that powerful autofocus system that you can use at any of the video settings.
Glad you touched on that. Dual pixel autofocus in Canon cameras on their previous processing engines has been a sight to behold. The serious filmmaking community are always very skeptical about autofocus in filmmaking. They just don't trust a lot of the technology to set the focus perfectly for them, but nobody does it better than Canon. To date, they have the best ability to lock focus and maintain it with a moving subject. So they're adding a tool to your toolbox when that's the appropriate thing to use for the job, where you have a second remote camera or a subject that's just moving so dynamically, you're not able to predict it, stunt sequences, things like that, where autofocus is the tool for the shot. Rudy, thank you so much. That's an incredible camera release with the R5 and the R6. We can't wait to get our hands on it at Samy's Camera, invite our customers to come in and try out these new cameras. We can't talk about new imaging sensors, new processors, new cameras, and not somehow get to optics. And Eric is here from Canon to talk about a number of new Canon lens releases that are just patching in, filling in this R lens collection to make it more and more complete. Greetings, Eric. How are you?
Hey, doing great, Benjamin. Thanks for having us again. We're completely excited for all of the announcements. I mean, the cameras are the one thing that gets the most attention, depending who you are, right? But to echo what you just said about filling in some of the gaps into the optical department of the RF line of lenses, we're adding 6 new lenses to the system today. July 9th, 2020. So without hesitation, I can say between the bodies and the lenses and all the other, and even the printer we mentioned earlier, this is something that we're completely, if I can use the word jacked, I think we're completely jacked about this whole announcement. It's just an enormous groundbreaking day for Canon, and to more to the point, to your customers. So we're excited to see everybody start using these and see what they can come up with.
It really is exciting for us at Samy's Camera to see such innovative technology all together at once coming out from a brand that we trust. Let's go down the line with these different lenses. You've got quite a few to talk about, Eric. Let's start with the new 85 f2.
Yeah, and you know, it's going to really fill the gap. Now, if you've been following what we've announced to date, we have an 85 1.2 L series lens. And as amazing as that lens is, it's not attainable for everybody for a couple of reasons. One, the price, it's a little pricey. But number two, it's also a little heavier. And I would say that the 85 f2 macro ISSTM lens, that's this one right here, is going to be, it's going to fill in all those gaps where photographers and those that are doing video are going to enjoy this. Number one, for the weight savings over the other lens I just mentioned, and number two, the cost savings. It's coming in at a price of $599, and that's just opening up the market on this lens for people to get into something like a 85mm portrait prime lens that is tack sharp, with 5 stops of image stabilization built into it optically. And then we didn't even mention when we spoke with Rudy about the combination, when you're combining IS between body and lens, called coordinated IS. Those two things in combination, when you're talking about RF optics and the new bodies, the R5 and the R6, are going to be just incredible to see. The lens is incredibly sharp. Of course, it's not an L series lens. It's not really designed to be that, but the market for this lens is anywhere from the rank amateur all the way through the working professional. And one of the great things I think about this lens is the macro capability of the lens, as stated in the name. Let's just use an example of event photographers. As they're running and gunning, taking shots, go from a full length shot with the 85 all the way up to close focusing at 1.15 feet. That can then open up the doors to get work done even faster, get those detail shots that you really need, and then back out for a nice, 3/4 length or full length portrait. It's just going to be an amazing addition to the RF line of optics.
That's great. So that close focus, that's very, very close. What's the reproduction ratio on the 85?
It's a half life size, so not quite right full 1-to-1 reproduction macro, but it's close enough to get you the detail shots that you need. And one of the other things, I'll tag on with what Rudy was talking about the low light sensitivity of these cameras. I'm pretty sure he mentioned it, but if he didn't, specifically the R6, when you tag that with the f2 bright aperture of this lens with the R6, the R6 is one of, I would say, and Rudy, I've heard him say this before, almost a perfect wedding camera. And when we're talking about low light capability, that camera is really going to shine. And when you combine that with an 85 f2 fast aperture lens like this, and those low light capabilities are just going to be amazing.
Well, that's definitely where my head went when you were talking about the functionality of the close focus and that f2. 85 is obviously a portrait favorite of ours. We love them for their rich defocus bokeh and the ability to use that lens to flatter a subject as much as possible, compress the background to bring our viewer's gaze to our subject, and then be able to instantly move forward and get those details of wedding rings, bouquets, baby's feet, things like that. That's a really versatile lens. So we're looking forward to having that, Samys.
If I may just take a little liberty here to show the difference in size between the 85 1.2 and this f2 lens, it might be a good, and this is something you should do in store too. I'm sure your Samys employees will do that. But I just want to kind of put these up side by side so you can get an idea of scale between the two lenses. And that's something that I think a lot of users, those that maybe perhaps can't handle the weight or don't want to handle the weight of the 85 1.2, they're going to appreciate the lightweight and high performance of this lens.
Absolutely. So let's move on down the line. The next lens we're talking about is a nice telephoto range, 100 to 500 millimeter. Let's chat about that, Eric.
Yeah. Well, this is yet another lens in the system that's filling in that missing gap, right? To this point, we've had, the 70 to 200 f2.8, which was part of that trilogy series of lenses that so many event photographers want. But now we're filling in that upper echelon of the moving into that super telephoto range with the 100 to 500. And of course, some of the big differences in this lens, now this is a 4.5 to 7.1 L series lens. It is a stout lens. I would say one of the first questions people are going to ask is, how does the image quality compare to the 100 to 400 version 2 on the EF side of the family? And without a doubt, I can say that this lens is as equal to or better than the 100 to 400. And that says a lot because that lens is a superior lens. So this lens, some of the differences, there's 5 stops of image stabilization in this lens where there's 4 on the 100 to 400. The close focusing ability of this lens is stellar, especially out at that 500 millimeter range. I'll just give you the range here. From 100 millimeters, you've got just shy of 3 feet on the 100 millimeter size. But when you go up to the 500 millimeter, you've got just shy of 4 feet. And 500 millimeters at that distance, I can see this, you know, obviously this lens is going to be targeted for that. The first thing that people would consider would be the wildlife photographer, the nature photographer. So when you're working with, for instance, like a butterfly or something like that, that may get kind of skittish because you may get too close to them with like the 100 millimeter macro EF lens. This is not a macro lens. I want to be clear about that. But at 500 millimeters at just shy of 4 feet, you can get in super close to your subject and get amazing detail without having whatever the critter is you're photographing get spooked. So that's kind of a cool thing. The other thing that's really interesting, and I would point this out specifically to your customers that are into video, the focusing sound or noise that this lens produces is virtually silent. It's powered by 2 nano USM lens motors, and literally one of the benchmarks to test this is using the internal microphone of the camera, and quite frankly, you can't hear it focusing at all. So not only is it silent, but it's really smooth and silky. So that, I think, they're going to appreciate a lot.
Wow. Well, definitely quiet lenses are key for filmmaking if you're tracking audio inside the camera. So that's a really nice feature that they've put focus on there. Also, the STM motor on the 85. I know STM motors as well are very quiet. So that'll be appreciated for people that are sort of doing maybe more like ENG style shooting, or where everything's kind of contained in one kit that they're hand holding.
Absolutely.
One thing you mentioned was this comparison to the 100 to 400L. And I wanted to mention to our viewers that aren't aware of this, the R series cameras, they came out with a complete library of lenses because they work perfectly through the use of adapters for the existing EF lenses that are already on the market. But what we love about these new lens releases is they're tailor-made for the new mount, which means that they're going to be smaller, lighter weight. They're not going to have that extra distance away from the camera body. So we're happy to see these dedicated lenses coming out. Obviously, with the shallow flange of the camera bodies on the R6, the R5, a lot of our filmmakers that maybe come to our CinemaWorks division, they're able to put even legacy cinema lenses, vintage optics onto their camera through adaptation, because Canon built these cameras with such a shallow flange, which really opens up the world for optics. So moving along, if 500 millimeter doesn't quite get you to where you're going, where do we go from there, Eric?
Well, okay. So one thing I'll just mention before we move on to the other lenses here, I didn't even mention that the 100 to 500, and one of the big selling points, in my opinion, for this is that the lens is a ½ pound lighter than the 100 to 400. So those that are very weight conscious about carrying a lens like this around, note that it's a good bit lighter than the 100 to 400. Now, moving on to the next two, and I'll introduce these as a pair and talk about them. These two lenses are interesting. Canon hasn't done this before in this type of a lens. And what I'm talking about here is the RF 600 millimeter f11 IS STM lens and the 800 millimeter f11 IS STM lens. These two are kind of a pair. They're very similar in their functionality. Same aperture. Now this aperture is a fixed f11 aperture. You can't change aperture on these lenses. Now the reason why we brought these lenses out, in my opinion anyway, is to serve and fill a void for the vast majority of photographers, from very amateur all the way to advanced amateur, to fill that void of those that maybe want to get into super telephoto photography but can't afford or carry the weight that a 600 millimeter f4 version 2 would carry, or the 800 millimeter f5.6, both of those lenses on the EF side of things. Substantial weight savings on those two lenses. Now, these two lenses we're talking about here fall under the family, so to speak, of diffractive optics, or DO. And currently in the EF line, we've had two DO lenses in our system. One is the 70 to 300 DO, and the other is the 400 f4 DO. Diffractive optics allow the engineers at Canon to build a lens not only smaller in footprint, but also substantially saving on the weight of that lens. So if you've ever had the 400 DO in your hands, you know that that's an amazingly light lens that you can handhold all day long and still have that power of 400 millimeters at you. Well, these lenses are no exception to that, that rule. And I will say that the 600 millimeter is, you're saving 4.67 pounds from the 600 millimeter f4 version. That's a pretty decent weight savings. And that's actually the version 3 of that lens, the 600 millimeter f4, is already substantially lighter than the version 2. So that's not as big of a gap as there is on the weight savings on the 800 millimeter, which falls at 7.14 pounds lighter than the 800 f5.6. So this opens up the possibility for somebody who can't afford the $13,000 for those two lenses a piece to get into wildlife and nature in an aspect that they're not really used to, that kind of magnification or focal length. So these lenses are not geared or tailored towards the professional. It is the other end of the market that they're trying to satisfy. And I think it's really going to come out with a bang. Now, there are a couple things that we need to talk about. One, a lot of people are going to say one of the first things they see is it's an f11 lens. Yes, it is. So it requires some light to be able to, capture decent exposures. But it's generally, I mean, during daylight hours, it's not a problem. Where you may run into some issues is in the early morning or late afternoon, not late afternoon, but right around sunset when the light is kind of dim, right? So that's going to be some areas that need to be you just need to be aware of that. And high ISO is going to be the vehicle that takes you to be able to get the shutter speeds that are required, especially for any kind of action that you may be working with. So as long as you have control of that, there's no problem with these lenses, and they are sharp. One characteristic of a DO lens is the way that they're designed. Diffractive optics, by their very nature, almost eliminate chromatic aberration or color fringing. So that right off the bat is a benefit there. One of the things you need to be concerned about or just aware of is that DO optics do have a tendency from time to time, depending on how the light's coming in the lens, of flare. It's this, a lot of times it's this aqua colored flare that you may see on a backlit subject or a shimmering water or a reflection off of glass, things like that. It's totally normal for the lens to do that. It's not malfunctioning at all. It's just a characteristic of diffractive optics. So as long as you're aware of that, and there should be no problem here. But I think it's going to solve a lot of issues for those that can't carry around a big heavy lens. Because one thing I will tell you, I'm going to bring the lens out here to show you this, because it is something really cool. This is the lens in its stored position. Now, when I move, it's a little out of focus. I'll try to move it back for you. But there's a dial here, or a ring on the lens that you turn. And then this then extends and then locks into position for its shooting position. And the 800 millimeter is the same exact way. So this allows the user to be able to store these lenses without having an enormous bag or its own independent storage solution. You don't have to carry it around. It'll easily fit in your bag. And beyond that, you could hand hold these lenses while shooting all day long. They are that light.
That's great. Well, I think you've done something really, really wise bringing out these lenses. So many of our photographers that are interested in these cameras, they love traveling with their cameras for photography. And this particular type of imaging, reaching out into the world of things that you can't approach physically, telephoto and super telephoto photography, it's always entailed that they lug around extra luggage, quite frankly, or maybe have
Yeah.
somebody just to help them get their camera gear from point A to point B. It meant that maybe the family vacation wasn't a place where we were going to bring the lenses that had the reach that we might wish we had for the imaging we're interested in. These lenses, I think at f11, that's not really the issue we think it is from the past, because these sensors are so light sensitive. They have such low noise levels, even at these high ISO values. And for our customers, most extreme telephoto photography happens when light is there, where we have, daylight or fairly fair light conditions. So I'm happy to see another option for our customers, especially at this price point. Can
Yeah.
you mention that to us, Eric, on the lenses?
No question. The price point on the 600 is $699, and on the 800 it's $899. So for a lot of people, it's an attainable purchase price to get into that magnification. That's kind of it's reachable for a lot of people. Let's just call it what it is. So,
Well, Eric, take us home. We've got two more optics coming out from Canon. If 600 and 800 don't take you far enough, you've got a lens you wish it had more magnification, we've got some telephoto extenders coming out, right?
exactly, yeah. There's just like the EF counterparts, there's a 1.4 and a 2x extender right here that I'll throw into the mix. I don't know if they're in focus or not, but there they are. They hold the same light loss characteristics that you would expect from an EF version, meaning the 1.4 gives you a one-stop loss of light, and the 2x gives you a two-stop light loss. But the magnification that you're getting from these, giving you versatility with your RF lenses, is vast. Now, let's talk about compatibility, if I can touch on that. Both of these extenders are compatible with the new 600 and the 800 that I just mentioned. And then there's one caveat with the 100 to 500. When you have these installed on the 100 to 500, your focal distance range, your focal length range is from 300 to 500. And the reason for that is so that the engineers could keep the lens relatively short and without having to deal with, a lot of the other optical design issues that they would do when making a lens of this sort. Because of the lens, the optics that when you zoom shift back towards the rear of the lens, that presents a potential issue when you put the extender on. And you can tell by when this optic here on the 2x extender, and as well as the 1.4, juts into the lens, and that prevents some movement, full range of movement from 100 to 500. So 300 to 500 is your range. Quite frankly, though, when you put these on, you're looking for maximum magnification. So to me, it's not really an issue. The build quality on these is L series standard. So basically, dust and water resistance are part of the package here, as well as a heat shield coating on the outside of the lenses. Each of them come with a microprocessor to help that speed and that communication between body and lens as they go between. And the optics themselves are optimized for full frame photography and of our sensors. And that's just holding that image quality as best as they possibly can when you're interrupting the master lens between the camera and the lens, right? Now you're putting something in between. So there is a little bit, just a slight loss in quality when you put an extender on. That has always been the case. And the other thing I'll point out is just a slight drop in the autofocus speed for the advantage of nailing focus. And I think that's going to be something that users appreciate, because it's not going to just, it's really looking to nail the focus advantage over just taking the shot. So these are going to be good additions to those three lenses. One thing I will point out that these lenses are not compatible with is the 70 to 200 f2.8. for the very reason I pointed out on the 100 to 500, that lens is designed to be a smaller lens. It doesn't conform to the normal 70 to 200 length as far as physical length of it. So because of that, these will not be compatible with that lens. Just want your customers to know that ahead of time.
Great. Well, when it comes to compatibility or performance, we invite you to reach out to our team at Samy's Camera. We're always able to talk about where you're going to find these telephoto converters work best for compatibility and what type of performance you can expect if they're the right choice for your particular usage case and what you're photographing with telephoto lenses. Well, Eric, thank you so much for wrapping up those lenses. I do have to mention, it's always been a mystery of the camera store why the 1.4 is only one stop and the 2X is two. I guess we'll never know. He probably knows, but I'm not gonna
I'll make a
ask him
call.
now. Yeah,
I'll make a call and see what I can find out.
they're doing some pretty interesting voodoo inside these telephoto converters.
Yeah.
But we're going to go all the way with this release today. We've talked about new cameras, new imaging sensors. We've talked about new lenses, and we're going to talk about printing as well. We have David here today to talk about a new offering from the Cmos line. So we're going to turn it over to him. Thank you.
And thanks for having us, of course. I know we've heard some fantastic things from both Eric and Rudy, and all of that stuff is really, really exciting. But of course, we know at Canon, we offer a input to output solution, meaning we have all of these great cameras and lenses that we just heard about, but we can't forget about our output solution as well. So along with all this great stuff that's coming out, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Image Prograph Pro 300 that was announced today also.
I mean, here at Samy's, we use a lot of the Cmos equipment in our service bureau at the Hollywood location, do a lot of large format printing with some of their products.
Mm-hmm.
We love seeing new cameras come out with great high resolution imaging sensors. What we love even more is to see what our artists and imagers do with the equipment. And when they can take it all the way towards exhibition quality prints, it's just a feeling of awe that it gives viewers to see artistry printed. And Cmos printers have always been on the top of the game. So what's going on the new model? What are the key features here?
Yeah, so you mentioned our Cmos Pro models, and I'm glad you did that because currently right now, if we had someone that was interested in printing just 13 inches wide, maybe they're a prosumer, they don't need that super, wide format, large format printing, but they still wanted quality. Their only real option at that point was our Cmos Pro 100, which used a dye-based ink system, which is fantastic, but it's not really ideal if you're selling any prints or maybe putting on a gallery because the archival quality isn't there in your dye-based printers. So their next step would have been the Cmos Pro 10, which was very similar, but now that uses pigment-based ink, which is obviously going to give us a better archival quality and things like that. The problem, though, became not really a problem, but one of the issues that some of our customers had when they were making a decision was, okay, well, I want that pigment-based ink. I want the quality of the Image Prograph Pro 1000 or the 2100 or something, but I really don't need to print larger than 13. I really don't need something that big. I'm not, printing a ton. I'm not printing every single day, so I don't need that, high ink capacity. So they were kind of at a loss. They had to either buy something that did things they didn't really need it to do, or they had to kind of sacrifice some functionality they wanted. So us introducing this Image Prograph Pro 300, which is really a 13-inch version of our Pro 1000, it actually has more in common with the Pro 1000 than it does with the Pro 10. So we're able to give them that higher quality print that you'd expect in an Image Prograph Pro series, but in the 13-inch wide format. So it's really great for the customers looking for that.
Great. Can you tell me anything about the ink set? Are we moving forward with an existing ink, or has this changed at all?
A little bit of both, actually. So we're using our Lucia Pro ink formulation that you've seen in our current Image Prograph Pro line. This is only a 10 ink system, though, so we're used to seeing this in a 12 ink system. And what we've done is we've removed the blue and the photo gray ink. But because we lost a little bit of that color space by doing that, we've actually enhanced the matte black ink tank here. So it's actually a slightly better ink formulation in the matte black than you currently see in our Pro 1000 and above. So now what this means is if anybody's interested in printing on fine art media, matte media, maybe rags, canvases, things like that, they'll really get phenomenal reproduction in your dark color spaces and great color gradation. The other thing I should mention too is we're used to the Lucia Pro ink tanks having really large capacities, so 80 milliliters and above. These are using the standard capacity ink tanks you're used to seeing on like a Pro 100 and a Pro 10. And that's why we mentioned it's really not ideal for someone that's going to be printing a ton, like a bunch of images a day. For that, we still have that Pro 1000 to fill that void.
Well, great. We're excited to see some of the print quality from this new printer. I'm sure we'll have one in our showrooms at our Samy's camera locations. And I'm really happy that you mentioned that archival quality that we're looking for in the print. That's something I always like to touch on with customers when they come in. If they're shooting seriously and looking to sell their prints during an exhibition, that's something that a savvy print collector will always ask. Is this something that's going to make it to that archival 100-year mark if stored properly, maintaining that vibrant, beautiful Lucia color? And it's great to know that this printer is going to maintain that. Can you speak to us about delivery time and the price on the new printer?
Sure. Well, currently right now, we're expecting the MSRP for the Image ProGraph Pro 300 to be $899.99. Of course, this will work with a lot of the rebates you're used to seeing from Canon on our Pro printers as well. So expect to see that stuff as well. We announced it obviously July 9th at 8 a.m. along with everything, and it should be shipping shortly after and available shortly after. There's not going to be a long wait time at all.
Great. Well, this has been a great discussion today, guys. Thank you so much to Rudy, Eric, David. We've taken us all the way from these brand new camera releases, the R5, the R6, new lenses that we have to look forward to, all the way to the print. And there's something new across the board from Canon today. We can't wait to get our hands on this equipment.